Spider-Man No Way Home found an intriguing way to blend the mystic art of sorcery and the street-level conflicts that Spider-Man is known for into one seamless union, combining some of the most contemporary aspects of the MCU with many of the more fantastical elements with relative ease. Spoilers ahead for Spider-Man No Way Home. At the end of the conflict, Doctor Strange casts a spell that makes the world forget Peter Parker in order to send the interdimensional nomads back to their home timelines. And while this is an adequate surface-level explanation for the closing of the film, upon further inspection, we are left to wonder if this spell had more drastic impacts on the multiverse than we previously thought. So stick with us, watchers of the Marvel Multiverse, as we explore the idea that this spell caused not only the inhabitants of the MCU to forget Peter Parker was and is Spider-Man, and Peter Parker in general, but may have actually affected multiple neighboring timelines, including that of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's universes. Before we begin, tomorrow we're giving away another Far From Home hot toy figure. We've given away 3 already. To enter, all you have to do is like the video, subscribe, and then follow the rest of the simple rules in the description down below. Now, let's get back into the video. The initial spell went wrong when Peter and Strange attempted to make the world forget that Peter was Spider-Man, ultimately pulling forward anyone in the multiverse who knew that Peter and Spider-Man were one and the same. Therefore, causing everyone to forget who Peter Parker is seems like a feasible solution, seeing as this would take away the driving factor behind them being pulled into the MCU. Until we examine the logistics of this a bit further. Is it possible that in order for this spell to work, that the characters from the multiverse who were being pulled into the MCU also had to forget, hence closing them off from the MCU's home dimension? This seems to make logical sense, seeing as their knowledge of Spider-Man's secret identity is what is actively pulling them through, and if they forgot that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, then they can't be pulled into the mainline MCU timeline. But what about the dire ramifications that this seems to have on the neighboring timelines, and especially that of the aforementioned franchises, starring of course Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire? We know that their timelines seem to be the 2 closest realities to the MCU, seeing as the casts of these franchises were the first to be pulled into the multiverse. Not only did the other 2 Spider-Men get caught in the side effects of the botched spell, but the principal antagonists from each of their movies also got trapped in an inadvertent calamity, and these 2 timelines seem to be the only ones that were affected by the spell as of now. Until of course the end of the film, when various villains from different franchises from the comics or other multiverses begin to enter into the MCU, with the appearances of characters like Rhino, Scorpion, Black Cat, and Kraven. Does this mean that the respective casts of these previous movies were the closest to being pulled through the multiverse, seeing as their realities seem to be the closest to the mainline MCU? If this is true, then it could mean that the likes of Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane and anyone from the web universe who also knows Peter's dual life could be on the brink of being pulled through the rift in the multiverse, even if they haven't yet. If these characters are destined to forget and the effects of the spell span much further than simply the MCU, then the ramifications of the spell may have been felt across their universes as well, causing both iterations of Aunt May to forget their nephew altogether, as well as cause any close personal friends and relationships to be ruined due to the spell. Same with Tom Holland. We know that Andrew Garfield's iteration of Peter is more reclusive, stating that he does not have time to pursue a romantic relationship, and therefore likely does not have a family. What this doesn't mean though is that he doesn't have intimate personal connections, especially seeing as it's been 7 years since the conclusion of the Amazing Spider-Man duology. Though Andrew's Peter is not as social, it does not mean that he was entirely alone, as he's been shown to be more than capable of constructing meaningful social bonds with those around him. On the other side, we have evidence that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man has a much more stable home life than that of Andrew or even Tom. He states that he and MJ were able to work things out, and it stands to reason that he has found a stable career with ample social interactions. There were even rumors that Marvel executives were planning on introducing Mayday Parker as Tobey and MJ's daughter, and though this has never come to fruition, it doesn't mean it's not necessarily impossible to happen in the future. Seeing both of the alternate Spider-Men face the same ramifications as their MCU counterpart could have dire consequences on both of their worlds, especially given the current state of their social lives. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man has more than 2 decades of shared experiences with his iteration of MJ, going all the way back to 2002, and seeing as the MCU is currently set in 2023 or 2024, it's highly likely that the adjacent universes are also set at the same same time. Sacrificing this relationship would be a devastating toll for Tobey's Spider-Man, and would largely result in one of the most drastic effects that his character has been forced to endure in his tenure as a superhero. However, with all of that said, we do want to say here that this theory is unlikely, and here's why. The main point of contention and the primary reason that this theory seems unlikely is that No Way Home showed an incredible consideration for the arcs of past characters from different franchises, as well as the fact that the characters are coming through the multiverse to the MCU specifically and not the universes of Tobey or Andrew. No Way Home served to continue these characters' journeys in a way that felt authentic and was done without resorting simply to utilizing a character strictly for fanfare. From the villains to the principal Spider-Man, every character seemed to have been handled in a way that did their previous incarnations justice and seemed to be a natural evolution, yet respectful progression of their previously established arcs. Effectively destroying the events of the Raimi and Webb franchises would be a dire disservice to both characters and would go against the level of care that seems to have been taken for these beloved iterations of Peter Parker. Not to mention that the spell was actually cast in the mainline MCU and not in Andrew or Tobey's universes. Now, of course, there may actually be Nexus events due to the fact of various villains surviving, which they didn't in the mainline timelines for Tobey and Andrew, but this doesn't mean that everyone forgot Peter Parker or Spider-Man. Needless to say, if this theory is true, then it would most likely serve massive backlash for both Sony and Marvel, and will likely not want to risk taking on this challenge, though it is a fun thought experiment to consider nonetheless. If the simple explanation of the spell is that the limitation to the MCU is sufficient to ward off multiversal incursion in order to make way for a good story to be told, then this would be an acceptable answer, and most times the simplest answer is the correct one. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this idea? Do you think this spell had wider reaching ramifications than just the MCU? Or do you think the effects were strictly limited to Tom Holland's home timeline? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. Don't forget to enter the giveaway for the Spider-Man Far From Home hot toy. I'll hopefully catch you guys in the next video, and Merry Christmas.